Roy Rogers Museum resembled a tiny sliver of the American West, surrounding the spot where admirers of all ages congregate could go into the realm of the monarch of the. For many years, it was a popular place for cowboys, full of nostalgia that displays saddles that are shiny and souvenirs that evoked happy memories, recollections of vintage Western flicks. But for good, those doors have been closed, causing many of us to wonder and questioning how we arrived at this stage. What became of such a famous landmark? Let's take a look back at the past and discover the background of the closure of the Museum of Roy Rogers prior to entering. Reasons for closing the Roy Rogers Museum doors. Let's examine the narrative first, why it was made, and why it turned into such a famous location in the first place. Leonard Franklin Sly is Roy Rogers, and everyone is aware that Roy Rogers was born in Pittsburgh, Ohio, to Andrew and Maddie growing up on November 5, 1911. Andy Sly near 2nd Street in a tent that subsequently became Riverfront Stadium's location. Roy used to make jokes about my second birth. Base that will achieve excellence from the beginning. He wasn't raised alone with Kathleen, Mary, and Sita are 3 sisters. Andy Sly did not particularly enjoy city life or his occupation, which he detested so intensely that he and his sibling will choose to forego it, and construct a 12 by 50-ton houseboat, using rescued timber that no one has ever considered, slipping away from the 9-to-5 grind. To the Sly family put up a river in July 1912, embarking on this houseboat adventure traveling up the Ohio River in the direction of Portsmouth, Ohio. They ultimately devised to construct a home on a piece of property they purchased, but after that life had different ideas. The massive flood of the family relocated their houseboat in 1913 onto arid terrain and continued to reside there. In the SES chose to contribute more in 1919, long-term roots, and purchased a property in around 12, a duck run near Lucasville, Ohio, a half-mile north of Portsmouth. They constructed a 6-room house, although it was really temporary. Prior to Andy's realization that farming wouldn't make them wealthy, he was a shoe salesman. Portsmouth factory to store items while floating. Andy would return home each weekend, and I'm doing the traditional dad maneuver. After he brought home a gift, he would bring more. The ideal gift for a young person is a horse. Leonard might have been given because little did learn to bike that way. Did anyone realize that this was only the beginning of his cowboy adventure sans contemporary radio-style entertainment? The Cunning family had to have a good time. It was all about square on Saturday nights. Neighbors would come over and dance. Leonard would perform on the mandolin, sing, and even point out the dance steps that were used. Traditional country entertainment. At this time, Leonard also discovered how he would yodel with his mother throughout the farm to exchange messages, which sounds much more enjoyable than yelling. Dinner's ready. Leonard got off to a great start, McDermott, Ohio school, but after 2 years the family left and came back to Cincinnati, where Andy discovered another worked in a shoe factory and discovered that the Leonard quit because his family needed more money. School to work at the factory with his father. He'd make an effort to continue his schooling by attending night classes. But when you're putting in long hours at work and dozing off in lesson, it's difficult to focus after being made fun of for falling asleep. Leonard quit school permanently, since it wasn't exactly a success tale about staying in school. However, he recovered well by 1929. Leonard's Mary, her older sister, and her spouse had moved to Los Angeles, California, which appeared to be the ideal location for Leonard, and Andy made the decision to leave their factory employment, gather their vintage 1923 Dodge and go. Traveling west to see the California dream didn't fully adhere, and 4 months later, they made their way back to Ohio. But it was just not long before the Golden State called once more, and Leonard had the opportunity to bring Mary's. He did not hesitate, father-in-law, and then came the Sly family in the spring of 1930, moving to Lawndale. Close to Mary, driving jobs were secured for Leonard and his father. Gravel trucks for the construction of a highway California project. Life appeared to promising, but the business simply went bankrupt in 1931 with no money and no employment. Traditional Great Depression hardships. Not one to Leonard is leaving for Tar, California, and obtained employment harvesting peaches for. Although it wasn't glitzy, Delonte, he resided in a labor camp where he may have been taken directly from the. Nevertheless, they managed to make it work. However, Roy was in for something greater. In California is pressuring him to begin. You're curious about that incident that changed Roy's life. Continue to observe when Len, at 19 years old, went back to Lala Mary, his sister. proposed that would completely upend his life. She advised him to try out for this local midnight frolic. A radio program on KC's Remember Lynn was in Englewood now. Quite shy by nature, but with encouragement, he made the leap from Mary. So wearing a Western shirt a few nights later. Mary prepared it for him since he doesn't need it. Designer labels when you have a Len. A gifted sister played the guitar and he strummed, sung, and even threw in some yodeling, and you know what, he perfected it. And a few days later, he received asked to join a group that performs country music. Not bad, called the Rocky Mountaineers, in August 1931. For a timid man, Len formally became a member of the Rocky Mountaineers and promptly tried to expand the group. So he placed an advertisement in the Los Angeles Tenors Herald Assessor, who could yodel since yodeling was popular in the past. Then Canadian Bob Nolan arrived, horse-bonded, but Nolan didn't spend too much time with the group, although he and Len got along well and remained in touch. Tim Spencer eventually took its position. Nolan and the team continued using the Len Spencer and another in the spring of 1932 Slumber Nichols. A guy believed they'd try it out and created a trio. And sometimes things don't go as planned. However, they held on to Len and Spencer, continued switching between groups, trying their luck all year round. Includes groups such as the worldwide the Obro Cowboys and Cowboys. When Spencer determined he required a respite from Len, found himself amidst all the music bustle. Jack LaFever's new gig with his Texas Outlaws, which were highly significant in the local in 1933. Len, Bob Nolan, and LA Radio. After getting back together, Tim Spencer chose to try. This whole trio situation is calling once more. This time, they are the Pioneers Trio. Len was playing the guitar, and they meant business. Spencer and Nolan both played string bass, performed the lead vocals that they practiced, frantically rehearsing their harmonies, till they were more snug than fresh. Cowboy boots. And as Nolan and Spencer began penning his own tunes, Len managed this project on behalf of the group. Things began with his other radio appearances, to click in 1934 after they introduced Hugh Farr, a violinist with a rich. Their harmonies were enhanced by the bassist's voice. Farr in the mix, adding a whole new dimension. They had such a clean sound that the announcer determined that they required a name. Pioneers Trio didn't feel the need to modernize appropriate for a gathering of young people, thus he changed their name to the Sons of the Pioneers. And they suddenly had an enduring name, and they weren't merely a trio, but now they were a full-fledged by the summer of 1934. These group of lads weren't limited to local radio favorites. Segments began to be syndicated around the nation, and they swiftly turned into a nationwide sensation that resulted in an agreement to record with Decca Records, and on August 8, 1934, they made a note of their debut songs, such as Bob Nolan's Tumbleweeds that fall throughout the next two. They produced 32 songs over the years, encompassing the traditional cold water from national stars to struggling trios. The Pioneers' sons were formally on. Roy was more than just a famous musician. He also had a successful cinematic career, and let's not even discuss the extent of business goods, which is why as the museum moved on, he used his skills onto the large screen from the stage and turned into a genuine Western legend. Len's foray into the motion picture business started in 1935, and he was off to a great start. He got a solid job in Western films, even getting a big supporting part while continuing to perform as a singing cowboy. Leonard Sly's fast-moving Gene flick going ahead to 1938, when he was in a bit of a financial bind, requesting a large salary that the studio did not desire to cough up, so they started a search for a new cowboy singer who wouldn't cost a fortune. Singers of all regions of the West, such as Willie, the Phelps brothers Phelps, waited in queue for the position, and you know what happened? Len, he emerged triumphant in this musical showdown, was given Roy Rogers as his stage name by Republic Pictures, which combines the appealing first name Roy with the recognizable. With this gleaming last name, Will Rogers, Roy was given the lead in a new title. Under the rapidly rising Western stars, suddenly, he rose to the status of Matina Idol, putting another person to the test as the most popular singing cowboy in America, but it not just his flicks placed him in, he also created waves in the limelight supporting parts. Like those in John in the year 1940, Wayne's classic Dark Command shared the screen with the sidekick of the future. George Gabby Hayes is appropriate for a man who began as the charm of Leonard Sly. Roy was seen for 16 years in a row. Between 1939 until 1954, he was a mainstay in the top 10 films in the Motion Picture Herald Lucrative Western Stars survey. He took first position between 1943 and 1954, also took the lead in the box office survey from 1938, 1955. First place from 194.3 to 1952. He only lost in the last 3 years, to Randolph Scott in the event that their Roy, the Cowboy Oscars, would have won them all. Every child loved him and his films. He is a legend among the younger generation, distinguished himself by filming the majority of his true color post-war films, but many Western pals continued to wear black and some of his films even featured white characters. Humorous animal adventures in which a dependable horse trigger would possess his. Can you picture a horse in your mind? Escapades, solely in Roy's world with its plot. When it came to business, Roy was no idiot. He cleverly negotiated a clause in 1940 into his Republic Pictures contract, granting him the right to use his image, and yes, voice for merchandising. This cowboy was skilled at making money. Introduced an entire range of Roy Rogers products such as action figures, cowboy novels include a comic book and toy sets, strip his Roy Rogers comic book series. The comics that Gaylord Dioy wrote became a hit. It's reasonable to assume he came in second only to Walt Disney about merchandise displaying his name above Mickey. In the meantime, the Pioneers' sons, Roy helped make the following bands famous. They continued to perform, and were still going strong, replacing participants when they retire or died. But Roy stayed in touch even when he wasn't doing anything. They frequently supported him in films with them. TV and radio programs discuss a lifetime. Des brought him friendship in 1944 while filming alongside Dale Evans. They spoke candidly about their Christianity, and beginning in 1949 joined the Christian group in Hollywood, established by Lewis Evans Jr., their buddy. This group featured well-known individuals including by 1956, Jane Russell and Billy Graham. They changed to become Bel Air Church in California's Apple Valley, where they calm streets and public structures were given their names in recognition of their work with children that are homeless or impaired. Furthermore, as if it weren't enough, Roy was an active Shriner and Freemason at all times. Roy and Dale are supporting their charities. Even included the upbeat theme music Happy Dale's Trails, which they sung as a duet to conclude their TV program. They co-hosted in the autumn of 1962. The Dale Evans and Roy Rogers Do a Comedy. ABC's Western variety show. Unfortunately, it was short-lived, canceled after only 3 months. Due to the fact that it was unable to match the Jackie Gleason show on CBS, Roy remained unfazed. He made numerous cameo appearances while he was down on other well-known TV programs that frequently play himself, or other characters that resemble cowboys, includes an iconic location on Wonder. Roy owned a woman named the Bushwhackers, a production business in Hollywood that created his television shows, and took on additional initiatives, such as the CBS Western. In 1955 and 1956, Brave Eagle was a television series that included as a young Cheyenne chief. Keith Larson 1968 saw a fresh interpretation of the cowboy genre. Roy granted the Marriott a license to use his name, company that changed their name to Hot Stores, Eateries, and Roy Rogers Eateries, when he wasn't engaged in managing them. It is secure to state that in 1970, his name was widely known, joyfully made their way back to Lecta, Texas, Tech University's main event Dale and the Intersea Colgate Rodeo Inn. He shot his final motion picture in 1975, TJ and Macintosh, at the 6666 Ranch, which is not far from his initially began, so why did he stop? If Roy was so successful, his museum, it's like closing the Roy Rogers mother bidding farewell to your favorite. The childhood toy you attempted to repair using duct tape for an excessive amount of time after paying homage to the monarch of the. This museum dedicated to cowboys debuted in California, prior to transferring to a more permanent place in Branson, Missouri. Because 1957, it served as a place of pilgrimage for loyal Roy Rogers admirers, crammed with an extensive collection of artifacts from his renowned career that we are discussing. Anything, including gaudy plastic saddles. This meticulously crafted leather cowboy boots, to Rogers taxidermy animals, has previously collaborated with a moving tail centers on his clothes bond, with his cherished equine companion, when Rogers retained the trigger when it died, unable to keep a secret from his family for a year, to endure the idea of burying him, rather. His trigger was clogged and shown at the museum as a unique and really intimate collection that struck a chord with Roy Rogers admirers. How many one of us would do so much for a cherished pet? Then why was the museum shut down? Roy's doors hold the solution. Directives to his son regarding the museum ever turned into a financial hardship. It would be disposed of upon his death. The family observed a decrease in The number of visitors increased from thousands to— It was heartbreaking, for only dozens to all parties involved changed. But with growing operational expenses and declining numbers that they choose to close in. Everything was shut down by the museum in 2009, was put up for auction as a peaceful lunch at their renowned Rogers. Christie's auction house. Dusty, his kid, has ideas about where each— It wasn't his call, but the essay should go. He was only curious as to what would occur to set off the family's feelings of sad to see their treasured possessions. Nevertheless, they also acknowledged the happiness it would benefit collectors and admirers. In 2010, there were more than 338 lots at the auction. Fly off from the Roy Rogers collection. The shelves with bids that were significantly higher than a preliminary calculations, such as his first, the price of a guitar $8,750 as opposed to the evaluated 5 times $2,000 show scripts were sold. Rogers even autographed its price tag. The value of baseball memorabilia exceeded Patrick. The anticipated owner of RFD TV station GCH intervened, saved the trigger and gunshot. His dog almost lost the likelihood of winning a trigger due to a phone. He made a mistake and was unable to submit his proposal. He was struck by the shouts and the chaos. In order to increase the bid today, he still gets notes from admirers expressing gratitude to him for preventing the end of the Golden Palomino. Was sentimental following the auction. The stunt double of Dale's horse and Trigger went to see the crowd at a private collector impromptu rendition of Happy Trails. When the auctioneer characterized it as the most vibrant, she would make a heartfelt and emotional sell. Accumulated over her 20 years at Christie's, the actor's lengthy history, the program and all of its related aspects was alive in many people's hearts as they developed even now with Roy Rogers as those children grow up and start families of their own. Reminiscent of the golden-tuned monarch of Roy, the Cowboys are still very good. In 1998, Rogers died on July 6th at this residence in California's Apple Valley in the company of his spouse, Dale Evans, and he was 86 years old and had other family members. He had undergone several cardiac surgery. Later in life, he was regarded as he might have departed as the Cowboys' king. This earth. But his influence endures. In our hearts are treasured for his extraordinary performances, musical prowess, and steadfast character. His influence was such important that President Bill Clinton honored his passing at the look of the White House. Rose Garden Clinton expressed his gratitude for what here presented the films he produced and the values that they exemplified. Today, there will be a significant amount of sad and appreciative Americans, particularly of my generation due to his professional. Pat Brady, Roy's longtime sidekick, remarked he genuinely held all of those beliefs. He lived by the values of honesty, kindness, and decency. As close as a man could get. He was hailed by another legend as one of the titans of the film business and renowned because Roy's character was enormous as well. Noteworthy passion for family and faith. Individuals such as Reverend Billy Graham remembered his death by stating in actual, he was taller than an idol in life, and he will reach farther than the stars. Serve as a model for the best things. To leave Hollywood with his son Dusty, considering his father's legacy, he said, "When I was little, I used to wonder what was so thrilling about this in the world." After that, the man combed over every clipping, the thousands of fan letters and images of everything he's accomplished, which nearly inconceivable during his Roy Rogers had 15 grandkids before his death, and his wife's 33 great-grandchildren, and 6 children are still alive, those Linda Lou Johnson and Roy Rogers Jr., Tom Fox, Cheryl Barnett, and Dodie Sailors Roy. Swift's legacy was continued by Marin Swift. Rogers Jr. even took on the role of curator for the Additionally, a museum dedicated to his father, to the Children's Museum and the Smithsonian. There were several displays at the museum, and an article in the New York Times obituary mentioning the museum as well as Roy's regular trips to interact with visitors. He kept wearing his white-silver Stetson gabardine suits and leather belts despite the fact that his legs hurt, demonstrating that the Cowboy King didn't actually hang up his spurs during the Roy Rogers Museum might be demolished. Roy and Dale's legacy will endure forever, motivate the next generation,